The Zephyrian delegate's tentacles recoiled from the display case as if the contents might leap out and bite him. Which, considering what lay behind the reinforced plexi, wasn't entirely unreasonable. "Barbaric," he wheezed through his breathing apparatus, the translation matrix rendering his disgust in perfect standard. "Absolutely barbaric. How did your species ever survive with such crude implements?" Dr. Elena Vasquez didn't look up from her cleaning cloth as she polished the brass nameplate beneath the exhibit. The M-class assault rifle gleamed under the museum lighting, its carbon-scored barrel telling stories the Zephyrian probably didn't want to hear. "Practice," she said mildly. The delegate's companion, a sleek hegemony official whose species name Elena could never pronounce without sounding like she was clearing her throat, gestured dismissively at the entire wing. "The pacification accords were the best thing that ever happened to humanity. Look at you now, productive members of galactic society, contributing to art, science, peaceful exploration." Elena moved to the next case, where a collection of fragmentation grenades sat arranged like deadly eggs in a nest. "We do try." What the visitors couldn't see, what none of them ever saw, was how Elena's fingers traced specific patterns on each display as she cleaned. Diagnostic sequences, status checks, the kind of maintenance routine that kept century-old military hardware in perfect working condition. "The irony," continued the hegemony official, warming to his favorite topic, "is that humans possessed such destructive capability, yet lacked the wisdom to use it constructively. Your wars were so personal, so emotional." Elena's cloth paused for just a microsecond over a thermal detonator's activation stud. "We're very emotional creatures." The Zephyrian had moved on to gawk at a display of human battle armor, its scarred plating testament to conflicts the galaxy preferred to forget. "This one shows projectile impacts. Imagine, actually standing close enough to an enemy to be shot at. Such primitive tactical thinking." "Humans always did like getting their hands dirty," Elena agreed, her voice carrying just enough self-deprecating humor to make the aliens chuckle condescendingly. They wandered through the rest of her wing like tourists in a curiosity shop, commenting on the plasma rifles. "Such wasteful energy expenditure." The tactical nuclear devices. Thankfully, their targeting systems were too crude for galactic warfare, and the powered exoskeletons, compensating for their natural physical limitations, no doubt. Elena followed at a respectful distance, playing the part of the quiet academic custodian perfectly. She'd been playing it for 15 years now, ever since the Cultural Exchange Commission had decided that former human military sites should be converted into educational experiences to help other species understand humanity's violent past. The irony wasn't lost on her that they'd asked a former human soldier to curate the exhibits. "Dr. Vasquez," the hegemony official called as they reached the wing's exit, "your species should be proud. You've transcended your primitive origins beautifully." "We certainly have," Elena replied, her smile as polished as the weapons behind her. After they left, Elena locked the wing's entrance and activated the privacy screens. The museum's after-house protocols gave her access to areas the public never saw. Deeper storage levels where the truly interesting pieces were kept, not the sanitized displays upstairs, but the real arsenal, the one the Galactic Cultural Authority didn't know existed. Her comm unit chimed with an encrypted message. Colony designation Kepler 442b had gone dark. No distress signal, no final transmission, just gone. Elena read the message twice, then deleted it. She walked back through her wing, but this time her fingers weren't tracing diagnostic patterns on the display cases. They were entering activation codes. By the time she reached her office, 3 more colony alerts had arrived, then 7 more, The pattern was becoming clear, and it wasn't random pirate attacks or equipment failures. Something was hunting human settlements with systematic precision. Elena sat at her desk and opened a file marked Facility Inventory Deep Storage. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to appreciate the irony of what she was about to do. Then she began typing authorization codes that hadn't been used in over a century. The galaxy was about to rediscover why humans had survived long enough to be pacified in the first place. Station Administrator Kethvar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of extreme agitation that Elena had learned to recognize during her years of feigned subservience. The emergency klaxons had been wailing for 6 hours now, and the Centaurian's usual composure was cracking like poorly mixed concrete. 17 colonies, he chittered, his mandibles clicking against each other. 17 human settlements, and not one survivor found. The rescue teams report unusual destruction patterns. Elena continued calibrating the atmospheric controls in the restricted section, her movement steady despite the chaos erupting around her. Unusual how? Precision strikes, surgical, as if someone knew exactly where to hit for maximum psychological impact. Kethvar's voice carried the kind of bewilderment reserved for witnessing impossible things. The attackers left infrastructure intact, but eliminated every trace of human presence. Efficient, Elena murmured, making a mental note to check the power couplings on the heavy artillery pieces stored 3 levels down. The station's intercom crackled to life with the voice of Commander Vorth'ak, the hegemony military attaché who'd spent the last decade filing reports about humanity's complete integration into peaceful society. All non-essential personnel report to evacuation zones. Military assets are being repositioned to defend core systems. Elena watched through the observation windows as sleek hegemony warships maneuvered away from the station, not toward the colonies under attack, but toward the safer inner worlds where the real power brokers lived. A tactical retreat disguised as strategic repositioning. "You're not evacuating?" Kethvar asked, noticing Elena's lack of movement toward the departure bays. "Someone needs to secure the exhibits," she replied, producing a requisition pad that looked entirely legitimate. "Cultural authority regulations. Can't leave priceless artifacts unguarded during an emergency." What she didn't mention was that half the items on her requisition list weren't in the public displays. Kethvar barely glanced at the pad before approving it with his biometric signature. After 15 years of Elena's quiet reliability, he'd stopped questioning her paperwork long ago. Once alone, Elena descended into the station's deeper levels, where the real work began. Blast doors that hadn't opened in decades responded to her command codes. Environmental systems hummed to life in chambers the station's official blueprints claimed didn't exist. The first cache revealed itself behind a wall marked Atmospheric Processing. Authorized personnel only. Elena's palm print unlocked mechanisms that predated the pacification accords by 50 years, exposing rows of vacuum-sealed containers that definitely weren't filled with spare air filters. Ology control. "This is Deep Server 7, a voice crackled through her comm unit. A frequency that officially didn't exist on any galactic communications registry. "Package delivery confirmed. The neighbors are getting curious about our housekeeping." Elena smiled as she began unsealing the first container. Inside, nestled in impact foam like sleeping serpents, lay components that would make the museum's display weapons look like children's toys. "Understood, 7. Tell the neighbors we're just doing some spring cleaning." "Copy that." "Oh, and Control? The new tenants who've been bothering our colonies. We've got a positive identification on their hardware signatures." Elena paused, a plasma core halfway to its mounting bracket. And they're using Vorth'ak technology, pre-war specifications, but definitely Vorth'ak. The name hit Elena's memory like a sledgehammer. The Vorth'ak hadn't been seen in this galaxy for 3 centuries, not since the Great Silence that had convinced everyone they'd either evolved beyond physical existence or simply died out. Apparently, they'd just been waiting. "How long until full activation?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the implications rattling through her mind. 6 hours for primary systems, 12 for full deployment grid. Elena looked around the chamber, calculating logistics with the cold precision that had kept humanity alive through wars the galaxy had forgotten. Weapons, ammunition, power sources, communication arrays. Everything humanity had supposedly abandoned when they'd agreed to play nice with the galactic community. "Make it 4 hours for primary," she said, "and send a message to the museum board of directors. Tell them Dr. Vasquez requests an immediate consultation on artifact authenticity." The whole board? Elena sealed the plasma core into place with a satisfying click. Somewhere in the station's depths, systems that had slept for decades began drawing power from reactors that weren't supposed to exist. Every last one of them. Because if the Vorth'ak were back, the galaxy was going to need reminding that humans had never actually stopped being soldiers. They'd just gotten better at pretending. The museum board of directors materialized in Elena's office via holographic projection at precisely 400 station time, which meant they'd dropped whatever they were doing across 17 different star systems to attend her consultation. Representatives from species that hadn't agreed on anything in living memory now sat in virtual council, their various forms of agitation creating a symphony of clicks, hisses, and electromagnetic pulse. Director Vex Holan of the Spiral Confederation leaned forward in his projection, his crystalline features refracting the emergency lighting into prismatic fragments. "Dr. Vasquez, your message was cryptic. What authenticity concerns could possibly warrant—" "The Vorth'ak are back," Elena interrupted, her tone carrying the casual authority of someone dropping a bomb in polite conversation. The holographic chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of projection equipment. Then everyone started talking at once. "Impossible," snapped Director Yitmore, her serpentine form coiling in agitation. "The Vorth'ak vanished 3 centuries ago. Their empire crumbled after the cleansing wars," Elena finished. "Yes, I'm familiar with the historical record. I'm also familiar with strategic retreats disguised as extinctions." Director Krelthon's mechanical voice cut through the babble. "Even if they survived, the Vorth'ak lack the numbers to threaten modern civilization. Their technology, while advanced, is centuries out of date." Elena stood and walked to her largest display case, where a collection of what the museum labeled primitive human computational devices sat gathering dust. With practiced efficiency, she began connecting components that the board had been staring at for 15 years without understanding their true purpose. "You're correct about their technology being centuries out of date," she said, her fingers dancing across interfaces that definitely weren't museum pieces. "Unfortunately, so's your intelligence on human capabilities." The tactical display that materialized above her desk showed the galaxy from a perspective none of the board members had ever seen, overlaid with defense grids, supply chains, and communication networks that shouldn't have existed. "Dr. Vasquez," Director Vex Holan's voice carried a dangerous edge, "what are we looking at?" "The real human diaspora," Elena replied, highlighting nodes across the display. "Every peaceful colony, every cultural exchange station, every research facility we've established over the past century. Congratulations, you've been hosting the largest military intelligence operation in galactic history." The silence that followed could have powered a small starship. Director Yithma's voice came out as barely a whisper. The pacification accords were signed by humans who understood that sometimes the best way to win a war is to convince your enemies they've already won. Elena's smile held no warmth whatsoever. We let you disarm our fleets, relocate our populations and integrate our societies because it gave us something far more valuable than military dominance. Which was? Director Krelton's mechanical tone couldn't hide the dread building in his processors. Access, Elena gestured at the display, where red indicators were beginning to pulse across hundreds of systems. Every species that welcomed human refugees, every government that hired human advisors, every corporation that valued our primitive ingenuity, you invited us into your most sensitive installations and never bothered to check what we were really doing there. The board watched in horrified fascination as the display updated in real time, showing human assets activating across the galaxy, weapons platforms emerging from asteroid mining operations, warships powering up in supposedly decommissioned shipyards, communication arrays revealing themselves in the heart of major population centers. The colonies the Vorth'ak destroyed, Director Vexalan said slowly. Were they really bait? Elena confirmed. Perfectly positioned to draw out an enemy we've been hunting for 3 centuries. The Vorth'ak couldn't resist the opportunity to strike at isolated human settlements. They assumed we'd become soft, defenseless. She touched another control, and new indicators appeared on the display. Vorth'ak fleet positions, tracked and monitored by sensors they'd never detected. They were wrong. Director Yithma's form had gone rigid. You've been planning this since the accords were signed. We've been planning this since the first Vorth'ak attack ship crossed into Terran space 400 years ago, Elena corrected. The accords just gave us the time and positioning we needed to do it properly. The holographic projections flickered as emergency broadcasts began flooding galactic communication networks. Reports of massive fleet movements, of installations revealing hidden capabilities, of human populations across the galaxy simultaneously dropping their peaceful facades. Elena looked at each board member in turn, noting how their various species expressed existential terror. Gentlemen, ladies, and crystalline entities, she said with perfect politeness, I'm afraid your Museum of Human Warfare is about to become operational. 72 hours later, Elena stood in the same spot where the Zephyrian delegate had once recoiled from humanity's barbaric weapons, watching through the observation deck as the final Vorth'ak dreadnought broke apart against the station's newly revealed defensive grid. The museum's emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red that seemed oddly appropriate. Commander Vorth'ak had returned from his strategic retreat with a fleet of hegemony warships, only to discover that the crisis had resolved itself while he was repositioning to safety. His flagship now hung in space nearby, its crew undoubtedly trying to understand how a cultural research station had just coordinated the destruction of an enemy force that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. The Vorth'ak approach was tactically sound, Elena said to the stunned hegemony commander via comlink, her voice carrying the same mild tone she'd used to discuss museum maintenance. Strike isolated targets, avoid major defensive positions, exploit the enemy's apparent weakness. Through the static-filled transmission, Vorth'ak's confusion was palpable. Dr. Vasquez, I don't understand how you could possibly know their tactical doctrine. Elena walked past the display cases, noting how the emergency lighting made the weapons look less like museum pieces and more like what they'd always been, tools, waiting for the right moment. Because we wrote it. The Vorth'ak military doctrine you've been studying for the past 3 centuries? It's based on engagement records from the first time they tried to conquer human space. She paused at the thermal detonator display, remembering how the Zephyretti had shuddered at humanity's willingness to fight at close quarters. They learned from their defeats then, adapted, evolved, became more surgical in their approach. But they still lost, Vorth'ak said, his voice small. They lost because they made the same mistake you all did. Elena's reflection in the display glass showed a woman who looked exactly like the quiet academic custodian she'd been 3 days ago. They assumed that because we agreed to limit our visible military presence, we'd actually abandoned our capacity for warfare. The communication array crackled with incoming reports from across the galaxy. Human sleeper cells had activated simultaneously, turning decades of careful positioning into a coordinated military operation that made the Vorth'ak's surgical strikes look like amateur hour. Supply depots had become weapons caches, research stations had revealed themselves as forward operating bases, cultural exchange programs had transformed into intelligence networks. The beautiful irony, Elena continued, is that everything you thought you knew about human military capability was true. We are emotional. We do prefer close combat. We are willing to take casualties that would horrify more civilized species. She moved to the powered exoskeleton display, where the hegemony official had once mocked humanity's need to compensate for physical limitations. What you failed to grasp is that emotions can be weaponized. Close combat can be a tactical choice, and acceptable casualties include entire generations willing to live quiet lives so their children could strike at the right moment. The station's blast doors were opening now, revealing launch bays that had been hidden behind false walls for decades. Ships that looked like transport vessels were reconfiguring themselves into forms that would give military engineers. Elena's comm unit chimed with a priority message from Deep Survey 7. Control, Vorth'ak main fleet is withdrawing to hyperspace pursuit. Negative, Elena replied. Let them run. They'll carry word back to whatever's left of their empire that humanity is no longer playing defense. Commander Vorth'ak's voice came through the comm with something approaching awe. Dr. Vasquez, what happens now? Elena looked around her museum one final time, then began the process of sealing the displays and restoring the privacy screens. Tomorrow there would be new tour groups, new aliens making condescending observations about human primitive brutality, new opportunities to play the role of the mild-mannered custodian who polished the nameplate while planning the galaxy's defense. Now, she said, settling back into her routine with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown for 15 years. Now, we go back to being civilized. Until the next time someone mistakes our courtesy for weakness. The emergency lighting faded to normal, and Dr. Elena Vasquez returned to being exactly what she appeared to be, a woman who took very good care of other people's assumptions. Esmedner.